Hello, this is Muri reporting from home in Berlin, and in this video I want to introduce you to Socket.io. So Socket.io is a very cool JavaScript library that allows you to have like a real-time connection between a server and one or more clients or browsers connected to that server. And what that enables you to do is basically build like chat applications or multiplayer games with JavaScript and Node.js. And in this video I want to show you how to create this very simple chat application I built with Socket.io. So here you can see that I have two users connected in this chat app in two different tabs, and what I can do is I can just send messages to myself like this, and only I would see this message, so the other connected user doesn't see this. I can also send messages to everyone so that everyone can see this message, as you can see here, and I can also send messages that only others see but not me. So that is the third type of message you can send. So as you can see here, if I send this message, I will not see this message, but everyone else in that chat room will actually see it. So yeah, we will be using Node.js, we will be using an Express server, and we will also be using a little bit of Vue.js for the front end. So yeah, stay tuned. So yeah, now let's get started. The first thing that I need to do is set up my project and install my dependencies using npm. And for that I'm going to go to my terminal and say npm init-f. So this will create my package.json file. And now I want to add my dependencies there by saying npm install express and socket.io. So this will install these two dependencies. Vue.js will actually just be including as a script tag in our HTML file, so that will be added there. The next thing that we need to do is set up our Node.js server with the help of Express. And yeah, for that I'm going to go to my directory here and create a new file called server.js. And here I now need to import or require my dependencies to set up the server. So this is now where we will import or require our libraries to set up a Node.js server using an Express application. So yeah, the first thing that we need to import or require is Express. So we have to say const express equals require the Express library. And the other thing that we need to require is the HTTP library by saying require HTTP. So this will actually create a server for us using the application which we will create with the Express library. So to create our Express application, our server-side application, we just have to say const app equals Express, like that. And then we will create a server by saying const server equals HTTP create server with our application, which we'll pass here as an argument. And that's it for creating a server, but the server currently doesn't do anything. It doesn't listen to any ports. It doesn't listen to any requests coming in. So that's what we're going to do next. The thing I forgot to mention is that the HTTP library here, it comes per default with Node.js, and it doesn't need to be installed explicitly using npm. So now let's continue setting up our Node.js server by making it listen on a specific port, like port 5000 I have here, by saying server.listen on port 5000. And here I can also pass in a callback function which gets triggered when the server is up and running. So I can just say console log server is up and running on port 5000. And yeah, when we now run this server.js file, our server will start listening on port 5000. The other thing that we need to do is make sure that our server-side application, our Express application, is able to handle requests coming from the browser. So if we go to this URL, this root URL in the browser, I want my Express application to handle this request targeting this URL and return an appropriate result. And to do that, I just have to go here and say app.get. So I want to listen to every GET request in the browser, and I want to handle this request in this callback function which I pass here. And this callback function actually also receives two arguments, the request object and the response object. So the request object contains information about the request that is being done to this URL here, and the response object is what we need to use to actually return a response to the browser. So or in this case, for the beginning now, I just want to return a status code 200, which says, okay, the request was okay, and that's it. So now let's test if our server-side application is set up correctly by going to our terminal and saying node server.js. So this will run our server.js file using node, and here you can see that the server is now up and running on port 5000. And if I now reload the page, you can see that the Express application is accepting the request to the root URL, and it returns the status code 200, which is okay. The next thing that I want to do before getting started with Socket.io is I now actually want to send an entire HTML file to the browser instead of this status code 200. And to do that, I will just create a new file here, the index.html file, and using a shortcut here from VS Code, I will just quickly create this HTML file and say basic Socket.io chat app. And now I want to return this file to the browser when it calls this URL. And to do that, I just have to say response.sendFile instead. And using the special variable here in Node.js, the __ name, we will go to the current directory and then add the index.html path here. So this will then actually return the index.html file to the browser when it calls this URL. So let's test it by restarting the server. That is important. You have to actually restart the server every time you change this server.js file to see the changes. And if I now reload the page here after running the server, you can see that I see my index.html file in the browser. So now let's set up a Socket.io, and to do that we first have to import it here by saying const socket.io equals require Socket.io, and we actually have to set it up both on the server and in the browser, of course. And let's start with the server side by saying const io equals socket.io with the server object as an argument. So using this io variable, we can then listen to clients or browsers connecting to this socket on the server side by saying .io on connection, and here we can then pass in a callback function which gets triggered when a client is connected to this socket, and we can then log out, for example, user connected. So what this Socket.io function does, I will explain in detail right now. So to explain what is happening here in line 7 with Socket.io, let's go down here to line 13. And in technical terms, what is happening in line 13 is our server-side application is exposing an endpoint. And what that means is our server-side application is basically telling the outside world, hey, you can talk to me, the server, by doing GET requests to this root URL. And then I will respond to it accordingly. And what Socket.io is doing here on line 7 is basically the same. Socket.io is basically making our server expose another endpoint, the endpoint with the path Socket.io, which clients then can use to connect or talk to this server. And that is basically what we now need to do to have or to establish a real-time connection between the server and one or more clients. We just have to make sure that the client is connecting to this /socket.io endpoint using the Socket.io client library. So so like I said, now we need to make sure that the client or the browser is connecting to this /socket.io endpoint using the Socket.io client library. And there are two ways to do this. You can actually install the Socket.io-client library via npm, or because our application is actually entirely served over a Node.js server, we can grab the client library from this endpoint itself. So when you go to /socket.io/socket.io.js, like so, if I go here, then you will see this is like the entire client library that we can use here in our index.html file to actually connect to the same socket endpoint. So that's what we're going to do next. So now in our index.html file, we are going to include that Socket.io client library and make use of it to connect to the /socket.io endpoint. And to do that, I'm going to add a script tag here with the source and the URL I've just shown you to grab the Socket.io client library. And now that I have the Socket.io client library at my disposal, I can add another script tag to say const socket equals io. So by just calling this function here, which is also available on window.io because the client library here exposes this io, this global io variable. By just calling this io function, our client will now automatically connect to this /socket.io endpoint, which our server-side application exposed. Let me just demonstrate by saving this index.html file and reloading the page. So if I save this, you can see that our server is now logging user connected, because by just calling this function, we will now establish a connection with the endpoint /socket.io. So now that we have established this real-time connection between the server and the clients, we can now do all sorts of fun stuff with it. We can, for example, now on the client side, listen to every push message coming from the server and react to it. So we can just say socket on message. So whenever the server pushes events with the name message, we can react to it by saying alert message received. So let's now go to the server.js file and say, okay, whenever someone connects to the server, we now want everyone connected to the server to receive a message. And I'm going to do that by saying io.emit the event with the name message. And I can also pass what type of message or what is the content of that message by saying hello. And I can actually also grab this hello message here in my browser or the index.html file here in the message event handler by using that argument. And instead of now alerting message received, I will alert the message I received from the server. So if I save that and restart my server here and reload the page, then you can see that the connecting client receives an alert with the content hello. And if I now duplicate this tab, making another user connect to the server, then you can see that the new user also receives this alert, and the first user as well, because we sent this message to everyone connected to the server. We can change that. We can make sure that only the connecting user sees this message. We can make sure that only everyone else sees the message. We can make sure that everyone sees it. That is now up to us. And now let's build this chat app I've shown you earlier. One thing that I should mention at this point, this event type message is actually just completely arbitrary. We can just call this chat message, whatever we want. We can even leave empty spaces in here, and we can then reuse this same event type here on the client side. So just remember these event types are completely arbitrary. They're not predefined. You don't have to use message as the event type. So this will work same as before. So to build this very simple chat app in the front end, I'm just going to use Vue.js in a very easy and simple way. I'm just going to include this second script tag here, which includes the entire Vue.js library, and then I'm just going to make everything happen in this single index HTML file. So don't expect any sophisticated Vue.js application in this video. So now I want to quickly set up my Vue.js application here by going to my script tag and saying const Vue app equals new Vue. And here I can just pass an object to configure my app, and I want to say that the element that I want to mount my app onto is going to be the element with the ID app. And the data that I'm going to use for this application is going to be a list of messages, which is going to be an empty array for now. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to prepare this div here with the ID app so that my app can mount onto it. And also I want to prepare this unordered list and add a list item here for rendering all of the messages in this list of messages array. And in Vue.js I can just say, hey, repeat this list element here for me for every message or index of that message in list of messages. And I want the content of that list element or list item to be the message itself. And when rendering a list of items, it's also always good to add a key to this list item so that Vue.js doesn't complain. And what's going on there? So now the key is going to be for me just the message string plus the index of that message for now. So if I save that, one thing I forgot, I also now don't want to render or do this alert whenever the client receives a message. I want to add this message to the list of messages, and I do that by saying Vue app list of messages push the message. So this will make our application react to this change and render the messages. So let's save and test that. If I now reload this page, you can see I see this hello message in this unordered list. And if I add another client connecting to this app, then you can see that client also sees one hello. But if I return to the very first client, I can see that there have been two messages for this client. So the next thing that I want to do now is I want to add this input, this text input, so that the client can now send messages to the server, which then will distribute these messages to whoever needs it. So that's what we're going to do next. So now I want to add this text input and three buttons to my front-end application. One button for sending the message just to me, one button to send the messages to everyone, and one button to send messages to everyone except me. And to do that, I will just go here and say input type text. This is the text input, and I want to have three buttons. The one is going to say send to me, and the others are going to say send to everyone and everyone but me. So now every time I click one of these buttons, I want to grab the value of this text input and send it to the server. And I want to save the value of this text input in another variable here, which I'm just going to call input, with the default value being just an empty string. And I can now connect this variable I have here with the text input by saying v model equals input. So every time the value of this input type text changes, it will automatically also update this variable input so that I can use it to send it to the server. So it's not going to be very elegant, but now I'm going to add three different methods to my Vue.js application. one for sending private messages, one for sending global messages, and one for sending broadcast messages. These are messages that everyone except the sender receives. So yeah, the first button here is going to react to click events and trigger the send private message method, which I'm going to define later. The second one is going to trigger send global message, and the third one is going to trigger send broadcast message. So and now I'm going to define these methods here in the methods object of my Vue.js application. I'm going to say send private message, and yeah, for that I have to actually move the socket like above my Vue.js application, and then here I'm going to say socket emit. So like emit this event to the server, send this message to the server with the event name private message, and the content of that event is going to be this.input. So this is the value of the input text input field. And when this is done, I want this.input, the value of that input field, to be empty again, so that yeah, it gets cleared. And yeah, I just need two more methods like this. The second one is going to be called send global message, and the event type or event name is going to be global message, and the third one is going to be called send broadcast message with the event name broadcast message. So that should be it for the client side, I guess. And now we just have to make sure that the server side handles these messages accordingly. So moving on to the server side, we now want to handle these events coming from the client, this private message event, global message, and broadcast message events. And yeah, in order to handle them here on the server side, we have to grab the argument that is also being passed to the connection callback here, and that is the socket. And this socket here represents the client that has connected to the to the server. And to actually react to these three events, we have to define like event listeners on this socket we have now access to on the server. That is not something that we can listen to on the global like server IO object, but we have to do it on the like socket that is actually currently connected to the server. And to do that, I will just say socket.on private message. So whenever a client sends an event with the name private message, we want to handle it by yeah, defining this callback function here, which receives also the content of that message. And now we just want to return this message we receive back to the client, and only that client. And to do that, we just say socket.emit chat message, because that is the event name the clients are listening to populate the like list of messages. And yeah, here I will just like forward the message I received on the server side. And that is going to be it for the private messages. Next, we're going to add the event handlers for global and broadcast messages. So now that we want to handle also like global or broadcast messages on the server side, we now have to add two more yeah, event listeners here on the server side. And the first one being for the global message event name, and the other one for the broadcast message event name. So with the global messages, when we receive this event, we now don't want to send this like chat message event down the same socket, but actually to all the sockets, to everyone that is connected to the server. And to do that, we just have to change it to be like here. So we just have to say io.emit. So this will send like this message, this chat message event, to everyone connected to the server. And here with the broadcast messages, where we just want to send this chat message to everyone but the socket or but the client that has sent this message, we just have to add this flag, the broadcast flag, and this will make sure that the sender of this broadcast message will not receive this chat message. And let's test this by saving this and restarting the server. So I will refresh here and just add another client to make it a bit more obvious. So here I have two clients connected. That's why I see two hello messages. And if I say something like this and send it to me, I will see it, but the other connected client doesn't see it. If I say send to everyone, then the second client will also see that, including me. And if I say send to everyone but me, then I will actually not see it, but the other connected clients will see that. So yeah, that's basically all, or the basics of what you need to know to use Socket.io, I guess. So there's more to Socket.io than just this, of course. In real chat applications or multiplayer games, you probably want to have rooms where users can join, and only users in these rooms would receive these messages. That is something that you can do with Socket.io. And then you probably also want to handle disconnecting or reconnecting users. How would you handle like Socket.io in a real, fully fleshed out Vue.js application? These are all topics that I would like to tackle in the future, probably. I just would like to know if this Socket.io and Vue.js topic is like interesting to you. And I can just say for myself that I have been using Socket.io now for the last 2 years or something or more for a multiplayer card game of mine. And I can say it's really fun to work with. So I encourage you to try it out. So yeah, I hope you learned a thing or two. And yeah, have a nice day, I guess. See you in the next one. Bye.